Welcome, everybody. Welcome to what is number 12, actually. This is our 12th session as a part of our inclusive leader program that we started back in August. We have 4 more sessions to deliver by the end of October as part of that program. So for those of you, the very few of you who are new to WiHTL, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Tea Colaianni, and I am the founder and chair of Women in Hospitality, Travel and Leisure. I will introduce everybody around the screen, on the screen shortly. Last week, we reviewed the results of the research we have conducted with the MBS Group and PwC. Last week we covered the impact of the pandemic on women, and today, as part of Black History Month, we will focus on the impact of the pandemic on people from Black, Asian and ethnic minorities background. The way we would run the session is we've got a few presentations to share with you the results of the research, but also we will have a few polls that we will be running, and I very much hope that you will be a very participative and engaged audience, and please use the chat box to share your reflections, ask any questions as we go along. I might, and probably I will, rather than might, bring some of you in the conversation at different points in time. So we'll have actually 3 presentations today. We'll start with Elliott Goldstein, a managing partner at the MBS Group. And then we'll move on to Katy Bennett, Director of People Consulting at PwC. We'll then move to Joanna Aunon, part of the WiHTL team, and Gina will be here from the team to support us as well. So feel free to ask questions, make any comments, and look forward to today's session, starting with Elliott. We'll start with you.
Thank you, Tea. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who haven't met before, pleasure to meet you. As Tea said, I'm Elliott Goldstein. I'm the managing partner of the MBS Group. We're an executive search firm specialising in consumer industries, but in particular travel, leisure and hospitality. And it's been a real pleasure to once again partner with Tea, her team at WiHTL and the WiHTL community, and also PwC in this really critical piece of research. And yeah, my pleasure to take you through this afternoon our findings, but in particular the findings that focus on both race and ethnicity. I know that some of you were at our gender this panel last week, but I think the majority actually weren't. So there's been a little bit of time just going over a few of the gender findings at the beginning, before specifically, as Tea said, focusing today on ethnicity and race. Let me try and bring up my screen. Has that worked? Slideshow from the beginning. Great, good. I'm in the middle of rural Derbyshire today, so I'm impressed that the Wi-Fi is enabling me to share a screen. And I guess before I just dive into the findings, and some of them may come across to some reason a little bit negative, but I want to start with something more positive, that obviously as a sector we've made huge strides over recent years in D&I. And for those of you who are at our annual report launch back in February, if you look at sort of pretty much every aspect of diversity, we were making progress across at the HTL sector. So I guess we came into COVID from a position of strength and a position of progress. That being said, as I think we're all too painfully aware at the moment, our sector has been disproportionately affected in every way from the Covid-19 fallout. And you've really got to see the most recent restrictions from Scotland and those rumoured to be rolling out across the UK to know that we are impacted more than we can ever imagine. So therefore, we thought it was a good time to try and take the pulse from our sector on issues of D&I and just how, if they have remained on the agenda at all, against so much trauma for our sectors. So what we did over the course of the late summer was speak to the chairs, CEOs, or group HR directors of the 60 largest businesses from within our sectors. And the themes that we're going to talk through today, I guess, are some of the things that came out from those qualitative conversations. So let me just walk you through some of the findings. So I think probably the most consistent theme since we started doing these pieces of research at WiHTL is around a lack of data. And in the context of COVID-19, we found that just 15% of companies we spoke with had measured the impact of temporary actions, for example, the furlough, on female or ethnic minority colleagues. And that proportion decreases to 6% when it comes to measuring the impact of permanent actions like redundancies. So in short, there's just a big black hole of data that our companies hold as to exactly what is going on. And that's even more critical than ever before, because 89% of companies have already reduced or anticipate reducing their workforces. So we know that there's going to be a big reduction, and most companies within our sector haven't yet thought of how it's going to impact on different populations within their workforce. That being said, despite this lack of data, our research identified that 77% of leaders we spoke with said the D&I was either a high or higher priority during the COVID-19 crisis than it had been before. So it's very important to people. And I think a few reasons driving that. I think firstly, there's just the significant risks to health has humanized the whole agenda. Secondly, not dissimilar to this, we've had insight into our team's personal lives more than ever before. People are much more human and much more individual than perhaps just someone who comes to work. Thirdly, as we'll talk about a little later, more pressure for consumers to do the right thing. Fourthly, the CHRO had elevated importance around this period. Therefore, the entire people agenda has risen much higher around the top table's priorities. And lastly, as we'll come to, and this is probably one of the most significant pieces, obviously, aside from COVID, the BLM movement has been one of the most defining items over the last period. So issues of race and ethnicity have been high on many corporate agendas. And as we'll focus on a little bit later on in the presentation, many business leaders within our sector found the BLM as an important catalyst to address difficult issues on race and ethnicity in a very authentic and tangible way, and in perhaps ways that they hadn't been able to do previously. But that being said, I think there's probably somewhat of a disconnect between what we outlined at the beginning, i.e. leaders taking D&I seriously, 77% of leaders taking D&I seriously, versus actually what's playing out in reality on the ground. The lack of data, D&I not talked about regularly at board agendas, D&I strategies not evolving during the period, and actually not really looking at how the data has impacted on women or employees from ethnic minority backgrounds. And I think our fear here is that this disconnect will lead to a set of unintended consequences. As we've argued consistently with PwC over the last 2-3 years, if you don't have the data, you can't make progress on the agenda. And it's impossible to know what policies are affecting diversity and inclusion. And especially today, when we're making very broad-reaching decisions, and those decisions are being made at real pace. And I think probably our takeaway from this is that companies' response to COVID-19 is having a disproportionate effect on women and minority ethnic employees. And that's echoed from the research that we've done with CEOs and HR directors, and also as Katie will talk you through shortly from PwC's survey of 1,500 employees within the sector. And I should say, and this is, yeah, of course, our industry's #1 priority at the moment is survival. And I don't think a single leader that I spoke with over the summer is deliberately making decisions that negatively impact on women or minority ethnic employees. But that being said, there is obviously a disproportionate impact, as we've described. I think that there's probably a few things that are driving that. Firstly, large-scale people decisions such as furlough or redundancies simply basically exaggerate existing imbalances. For example, there are many more ethnic minority employees at entry-level roles. Those roles are probably the most hard impacted, etc. Secondly, I think, and this is a very, very major thing, sort of we're making such good progress. However, over the last few years, and a lot of the programs that we implemented as a sector to make progress. So, for instance, at grad level, making sure that we were hiring very diverse populations into the graduate community within our businesses. It's those particular programs that have been hit hardest, and I think alongside that, the fact that D&I budgets have been hit hard. D&I professionals exited, programs cancelled, networks deprioritized, etc., have all come together. I think the last bit in terms of undoing progress is it feels that there's simply less pressure from shareholders, apart from the very largest listed companies, to act. So specifically, how does that all impact on minority ethnic employees? So I think it's just worth mentioning a couple of pieces of data from some of the earlier work we did towards the start of this year, published in February. Our research then showed that just 24% of companies specifically target race or ethnicity as part of their D&I strategy. So race and ethnicity is only a small proportion of the D&I work within our sector. And almost half of the companies within our sector gather no race or ethnicity data. And therefore, most companies within our sector have a very incomplete picture of what race and ethnicity looks like within their workforce. I think quite counterintuitively, one of the reasons why some companies have not developed good data is the prospect of mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting. And many of the companies that we spoke to have said that they are basically waiting to understand what they need to collect before they implement quite expensive and quite difficult processes to collect the data. So possibly the delay in implementation there is further exacerbating the issue. As with gender, despite real progress in recent years, for most companies in the sector, ethnic minority definitely decreases with seniority. Just to put that in stark contrast, it's 12.5% of the UK population is from ethnic minority backgrounds, yet our research in 2019 showed that all but 3.4% of ExCo members are white. So just a real disparity between the overall population and ethnicity. And as companies mounted their very rapid response during the initial phases of the pandemic, I felt as if decisions would be made amongst a very small group of leaders, CEO, CFO, chair, HR director, who in many cases, in fact, probably the vast majority of cases, were often all male and all white. And sort of at the other end of the business, where, as I said before, there was the highest ethnic minority representation, those are the employees that were typically faced with widespread redundancies or indeed furlough. Also, another sort of a nuance within the HTL sector is that probably some of the most senior ethnic minority franchise leaders come from within the franchise world, so QSR and hotels specifically. And many of those leaders, it was their entire frontline businesses were shut down. So whilst the head office team, who may be often less racially and less ethnically diverse, were often in roles or furloughed, the franchisees themselves were completely shut down over over the period. So it felt as that the franchises were probably much harder hit than the corporates that serve them. I think another major piece that we picked up on in our conversations with CEOs and HR directors was around role models. And as we've talked about before, the visibility of role models is obviously critically important to developing more balanced leadership teams in the future. And I think quite sadly, in many companies, a lot of the visible role models, including those from ethnic minority backgrounds, were at risk of redundancies. Some of the companies we spoke to were aware of that and the disproportionate impact that could have, and they took quite specific actions to ensure that those individuals were removed from the redundancy programs. But I think it's fair to say that not all role models have been this lucky, and many have been made redundant. Additionally, some of the role models that joined our sector in recent years as part of our drive to improve diversity, particularly at the most senior levels of leadership, that they joined in functions such as marketing, IT, comms, HR, finance, i.e. functions that aren't sector specific to HTL, that are very transferable outside the sector. So we see it as a distinct risk that a number of those role models that have been implanted into HTL will choose to exit our sector and move to safer ground over the coming months. So I think the knock-on effect of losing role models hasn't yet become clear, but I think it will definitely be very, very significant. And as we seek to recruit throughout the talent pipeline in future, we will definitely miss their presence within the sector. Lastly, touching on Black Lives Matter, and I think it's impossible to address D&I and the impact of the last 3 months on ethnic minority employees without asking leaders about the BLM movement and what impact that it has had on staff and their strategy. Indeed, as Katy will hint at in her presentation shortly, 99% of employees within the HTL sector were aware of the movement. So it's a very, very visible, very visible movement within HTL. That being said, the conversations that we had with senior leaders for this research shows it's a disparity between the British businesses and the much more international HTL businesses that often have a large exposure to the US. In the UK, I think most leaders reported feeling no real drive from either customers, staff, or stakeholders to act on the racial injustice that they'd seen emanating from the US. And I think possibly that's one of the reasons why, in Katy's leadership, she mentioned that only 19% of HTL employees confirmed that their organisations acted on the movement, on the BLM movement. And I think this lack of involvement from employees within the sector is very telling. I won't mention the name of the company, but I think someone from that company is on the call though. The HRD from a large multi-site leisure business mentioned that the whole BLM movement had really made them as a business reflect on the whiteness of their employee base and actually their customer base. They felt that and they hadn't really thought of it in those terms before. When they looked at the entire organisation, pretty much everyone involved with the business was white. And I think that's a real issue for some of the companies within our sector. I think for those companies where the BLM movement was pushed up the agenda, it was usually spearheaded by those close to the movement. One executive reflected to me that all the internal pressure that they received was from Black employees. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, in most businesses within our sector, there aren't many Black leaders, hence the difficulty of amplifying internally on the issue. I think other businesses really did want to do the right thing, but couldn't translate some of that feeling they wanted to do the right thing because they were channeling all of their resources into staying afloat over the last period. And to some extent, customer the customer narrative during the last period for many HTL businesses has often been around issues about refunding flights, refunding holidays, etc. And actually it was drowning out any customer voice on the BLM movement. And what HR did, read a quote, confessed to me, I think that in the end, we simply chose to reinforce the diversity measures that we had. It was right in the middle of other crises. And in normal times, we might have done a lot more. That being said, when we look at the US, I think obviously the messages of the BLM movement were much more vivid and real. I think consumers and grassroots campaigns alike use social media to hold businesses accountable, and really demanded that they make authentic and actionable statements to resolving racial inequality. And actually businesses here with exposure to the US told me that this was an absolutely pivotal part of their ethnicity and race strategy. An executive within a significant US business told me that they basically use this as an opportunity to significantly invest in a load of programs that, for instance, their Black employee network, etc., to address issues of racial disparity. And I think overall within the US businesses, it felt the BLM movement really had increased attention and facilitating much more open and productive conversations with leadership about the issue. So I think just a few pieces on looking ahead and trying to end on some slightly more positive notes. I think wherever there is chaos and there's disruption, there is always an opportunity. And I think that we are all involved now in reorienting our businesses for the future. And restructuring, I think, does enable us to restructure with D&I front of mind. And I think there are probably 6 things that we wanted to highlight that businesses can do in order to make the most out of this awful situation that we find ourselves in as a sector from a D&I perspective. I think the first and foremost thing is make D&I a priority for your organisation and for your boards. Simply, we argue that businesses who do not prioritise D&I will suffer, as they will be outpaced and outperformed by businesses whose leadership teams more accurately reflect their customer base. Yeah. We've termed this a social license from customers to operate. And when you consider how big the Black and ethnic minority population is in the UK, the fact our leadership is not representative of that population obviously means we're not working out how to access that population in the right way. Secondly, and I've said this a few times already, what gets measured gets done. We really do need to measure the impact of potential actions to ensure that unintended consequences don't slip in. I think in the early stages of the pandemic, possibly it was excusable not to collect the right data. We're now sort of moving more into steady state within this new normal. So really there is no excuse not to be collecting true and meaningful data. If we don't collect that, we won't know the impact that we're going to have on Black or ethnic minority colleagues. Thirdly, I think we need to consider the impact of decisions we've already made on COVID-19 with regard to race and ethnicity on future decision making. For example, if you have removed senior Black or ethnic minority leaders from different groups within your business, are you ensuring that those groups are not going to sort of fall into a groupthink mode, and they do have the diversity of thought around the table? Fourthly, and this is particularly sort of in a phase of future redundancies I think many businesses are about to go through, ensure that you're protecting role models who many businesses have spent the last 3, 4, 5 years building up into real figureheads the sector can embrace. Fifthly, and this is probably slightly more towards gender than ethnicity, but really embrace flexible working and everything that might bring in order to make our sector more accessible to those with caring responsibilities. And lastly, because every cloud really does need to have a silver lining, that if you are going to restructure, you can restructure with diversity front of mind. It's terminology that Taya always shouts at me for using, so I'll say it quickly in case safely join. In many roles in our sector, there are often dead man's shoes. People stay in the roles for 5, 10, 15 years. And actually, if there is going to be change, there's great talent at the level beneath that could then step up into those roles. And I think this, hopefully, awful pandemic could be a turning point where some of that future talent could emerge into leadership roles. So thank you all. I think now over to Katy.
Excellent, thank you, Elliott. While we are switching over presentations, I'll quickly launch a poll that I would like all of you to complete for me. So the question is, in your view, are your company's leaders showing a continuing commitment to diversity and inclusion? Is that commitment visible? I've got 57% of you have voted. I need a few more, so it's going up, 65%. I'll give it a few more. We are at 70%, so a few more of you. I know that some of you who are on the telephone are not able to complete the poll. Okay, I'll close it now. We've got 72% completed, and I'll share the results. So that's interesting. 74% of you have said yes. You can see that commitment from leaders. 24% have said no, and just one person has said don't know. So the commitment is there, 74%. I would have liked to see everybody saying that there is a commitment, but I'll take the 74%. Thank you for sharing your views on that. Katy, over to you. I can see your presentation is up on screen.
Yes, it is. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So just to follow on from kind of Elliott's presentation, as he mentioned, we did a little bit of research. Maybe we could flip on to the next slide, please, just to supplement the type of questions that Elliott was talking to our leaders about, with some questions for our workers, our workforce within hospitality, travel and leisure. So over August of this year, and kind of recognizing that every month is different at the moment, so that's always going to be a bit of a factor. We worked with one of our partners, Opinium, to talk to 1,500 employees who are either currently working in hospitality, travel and leisure, or were until recently, because we wanted to make sure we also captured the views and experience of people who had sadly lost their jobs during the pandemic. So we talked to 1,500 employees, and if we go on to the next page, please, what we really wanted to understand from them was, how has it felt to work in hospitality, travel and leisure during these very difficult and uncertain times of COVID-19? And specifically, how might that experience be different for different groups, with a real focus on the experience for women, and also for those who are Black, Asian or minority ethnic. And you'll see throughout, just on terminology, that we're using the terminology BAME here. I appreciate that not everybody understandably thinks that's the right terminology. There's lots of questions out there, but that was kind of the easiest way to present this data, and to ensure that we're getting a good enough sample size. But we have looked at the underlying data too, just to test some of these assumptions. So we asked people, do they think that D&I has taken a back seat as organizations have focused on COVID-19? We've asked what the experiences of working in the last few months has been, and we asked about their current work situation. So had they been furloughed, had they been put on reduced hours, had they been made sadly redundant. And then we also, as Elliott said, asked some specific questions around Black Lives Matter, recognizing that, of course, that movement has had a huge amount of energy and focus, understandably, sadly, following the killing of George Floyd. So they were the type of questions that we asked. And if we could go on to the next slide. Apologies, I've had IT issues today, but I've been very kindly supported on my slide moving. So what did we find? Well, we found some positive news. So overall, looking across the survey, workers in this sector did feel supported by their employer, and given how much kind of uncertainty and difficulties this sector has faced, that in itself is positive. However, we did observe a difference in that answer when we looked at those who were BAME compared to those who were not. So 65% of BAME workers felt supported by their employer compared to 71% who would describe themselves in some way as white. So quite a kind of noticeable difference there. I think perhaps even more concern was when we asked workers if they felt safe. So did they feel that their employer had taken the steps that were necessary to protect their safety in the month of August, so during COVID-19? Unsurprisingly, perhaps a lot of workers did have safety concerns, but it was really concerning to see, again, a noticeable difference between the experience of BAME workers and their white colleagues. So 40% of BAME workers said that their employers had taken the correct steps compared to 51% of white colleagues. So white colleagues feeling safer, feeling that enough steps had been taken. And I suppose when you add to that the lens of Public Health England, showing that the people from a BAME background were at higher risk of COVID-19, that's quite a worrying combination. So people at higher risk, perhaps feeling that their safety was not being properly protected. And interesting as well to see that actually the least favourable experience amongst BAME workers was amongst clerical and managerial roles. So it was there that we saw the biggest difference between BAME workers and their white colleagues. So 29% having a negative experience compared to 20% of their white colleagues. And that's quite different for those of you who joined last week to what we saw in gender, where it was more in ancillary and support roles. So for example, cleaners, that the biggest difference was experienced. So interesting to see that. And I think we'd need to do further research to understand what might be driving that, but quite a kind of interesting difference. And at the bottom here, some of the kind of quotes and individual things that people said to us, so to bring that voice. So some positive, people feeling respected regardless of their ethnicity, the color of their skin, their words. People feeling that everyone has worked together, like a real sense of collaboration, and that their employer had tried to look after them. But also concerns about safety, people feeling they didn't get support, and kind of worrying things like abuse and insults from customers, which is concerning. If we go on to the next page, please. The other thing that I mentioned we asked was about people's current work situation. So are you working? Are you on furlough? Have your hours been reduced, or have you been made redundant? And here again, concerningly, we see a difference between the experience of BAME workers and of their white colleagues. So 67% of BAME workers had been furloughed, made redundant, or put on reduced hours, compared to 62% of white colleagues. So a noticeable difference there. We've included some statistics here around parents and carers, which we also included when we talked about gender last week, showing again a very big difference between those regardless of their ethnicity who were parents or carers compared to those who weren't. So those who were parents, 75% of those people who were parents were put on furlough, reduced hours, redundancy, and 86% of those with caring responsibilities. So much bigger percentages, and many of those feeling that was partly linked to their caring responsibilities. So so clearly, you know, in a sector where we know that a lot of people have in some way had their work reduced or paused or removed, that impact being felt most strongly by those who are Black, Asian or minority ethnic, also by women, and by those workers who are parents and carers. If we go on to the next slide, I feel like I don't have enough positive news for you, but I'm going to try and find some positivity at the end, I promise. You know, this is clearly a really challenging time, and we're all kind of trying to find the themes in this data. So we then asked people, well, what has your organization been doing? So what action have they been taking in this space? And, you know, to echo the kind of the theme that Elliott already talked about, there is definitely an absence of data. So less than a third of people we spoke to said that their employer collected information on workers' ethnicity, and many others, you know, not really kind of knowing if that data exists. And I suppose the reason we ask this question, just to echo what Elliott already said, is that, you know, data is such an important tool in decision making that is fair. And it's quite hard to know if in fact, it's impossible to know for sure if your decisions around restructuring, reorganization, changing workers' hours, or putting them on furlough, or even, you know, redundancies, is balanced across different ethnicities if you don't know the ethnicity of this kind of line of workers that you're looking at in a spreadsheet. And so that kind of safeguard, that test of fairness, is really difficult if you don't have the data. And looking at it after the fact, which is of course to some extent what we're doing right now, is when it's too late. So actually you need the data, you need to be asking, you need to be collecting that data, but then you need to be using it as a tool to inform decision making, not as a tool to measure the impact of decision making if you want things to change. And I guess that's why we talk about data so much. I have realized after the fact, so it's entirely my own fault, that the thing that I forgot to include in this slide pack is the data that Elliott was talking about Black Lives Matter. So I'm just going to talk you through some of those statistics. They are in the report, and I can provide the slide afterwards too, so my apologies. But you know, as I mentioned earlier, we did specifically ask survey participants about Black Lives Matter. So firstly, we asked if they were aware of it. And I think you'll be unsurprised to hear that almost all of them were. So 99% of workers, that's of all ethnicities, were aware of the Black Lives Matter movement, and 31% would say that they knew quite a lot about it, with nearly half of workers who were Black, Asian and minority ethnic saying they knew quite a lot about it, compared to 29% of white colleagues. So as a kind of baseline question, definitely something that the workforce within hospitality, travel and leisure are aware of, and you could argue therefore have some interest in. However, the flip side of that, and you know, I think perhaps reflecting some of Elliott's finding, is that only 30% of those workers we talked to said that their organization had ever had a conversation about racism. And only 19% said that their organization had responded in any way to Black Lives Matter. So whether that's, you know, some sort of statement from the CEO, a press release, any sort of internal engagement on communications, we're seeing less than a fifth reporting that their organization made any statements in this area. And, you know, clearly that's a concern if we want to see action. So a kind of real low level of conversations at the moment going on about racism, about ethnicity in general, and particularly Black Lives Matter. And there wasn't a big difference in that awareness between those who were Black, Asian, minority ethnic and those who were white. So it doesn't look like from the data that this is around employees not reading the communications, perhaps. That might be a little bit of it, but it seems like that is also, and as I say, kind of almost borne out by Elliott's research, that not many organizations have done anything active in this space. Now, I completely appreciate that it's an extremely complicated and challenging time for the sector, but just a kind of interesting reflection to maybe think about as we move in to on the next slide, you know, the kind of what next of taking action in this space. And you know, I'm not going to talk about this too long because I know we're going to have questions, and I think Elliott has already really summarized most of this. But you know, the positive, I think, is that we're having this conversation, and that we can therefore harness the energy, the values of inclusion and diversity across the industry, and also to make our businesses better places. So there are opportunities here to reach more diverse customers, to expand who our customers are and what we know about them, if we can ourselves become more diverse, become more inclusive in the way we go to our markets and talk to our customers and support them. I think at the same time, you know, those stats around the lack of conversations about racism, you know, we have, these are difficult conversations. I don't want to pretend they're not. I find them difficult to talk about. I'm sure you do too. But actually, we have a moment here to be more open about racism, about, as Elliott said, everyone's worked and lived experience, because we're all seeing each other's homes right now in a way that we often never have before. So they've got that opportunity. And where we've got that opportunity and we've harnessed it, and we also start to get the data to understand what's going on, we've got a great opportunity to move forward and to progress. So I guess that's what I usually say. And of course, just to finish, recognizing that what we're learning from being out in the open is that we all have different experiences, and some of us may have different needs. And it's important to recognize that throughout any action in this space. So that's a brief summary from me. But back to you, Taya.
Sure, thank you very much. So I was trying to unmute myself, trying to find, as the things are shuffled on my screen, I lost my unmute button. Thank you very much for that, Katie. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask Jo to share a few slides on some of the actions, because I don't want this session to be like all the things that we're not doing, and the negative side of things, and the frustrations that some of us have, and certainly some of those people within the ethnic minority community have, because of the lack of action. And I've asked Jo to just to put a few slides up in terms of really showing some of the things that we're doing to have the conversation and some of the tangible actions. While Jo is sorting that out, which I see that she's doing, I'll quickly run another poll asking you whether your companies are collecting data on ethnicity. So if you can vote now, does your company collect data on ethnicity? Let's see what the answer is. Then I will pick up on some of the comments in the chat as well. We still have a few more, you know, we are at 67%. So if a few more of you complete, actually it's, you know, quite interesting. For some reason, somebody can't see the polls on their screen. I'm at 71%. A few more, if there are a few more that are able to see the poll and vote, and then I will share that with you. I'm actually quite surprised by the answer. I will end the poll and share the results. 61% is collecting the data, which, as I say, is a surprise to me, because, you know, we always hear from companies that the answer is that they don't, and the 21% don't know. So I am going to ask another question from you. So would you feel comfortable sharing your ethnicity with your company? So if if your company is collecting the data, are you sharing your ethnicity? And if your company is not collecting the data, would you be comfortable sharing your ethnicity and knowing that your company knows about that? 63% have voted, so a few more of you need to click that response, and I'm at 66%, so a few more. Would you feel comfortable sharing your ethnicity? Okay, we'll end the poll now and share the results, and 87% have replied yes. So that's quite a strong, I think, position. Would be interesting to see whether if we could split it between different ethnicity, whether we would see a difference or not in that question. So, Jo, shall I move on to you?
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Taya. So in terms of, well, I'm very conscious of time because we've had such great content. I'm going to go through this in a little bit of speed. So please, you will get the slides as part of the recording. But we have, as Taya mentioned, we're in the middle of the ILP. We finished on the 19th of October. I think we've had over 1,500 people there registered for the series of the Inclusive Leader. And one of the parts of the series that we did was to partner with Green King and ENAR, the European Network Against Racism, on 3 particular topics around race and ethnicity. And I think the reflections that really came out from that is, and one of the questions that Juliana from ENAR asked is, are you anti-racist as an organisation? Are you a feminist organisation, and are you anti-racist? And we'd never really heard it in that way before, and I just think that's a great question and a great reflection. And so, and you can see there from the quote, and that was a key point in a reflection for us about how stark that comment was. And really the reflections of that series, just to share with you, that I think come into the research, is you have to make that declaration. If you have to be serious and not have lip service, and beware of the intersectionality. And that really came through. So one of the sessions that we did with women of colour, so if you imagine from the research, we talked about the impact of gender and we talked about the impact of ethnicity. When you're combining with intersectionality, that can be even more of a disproportionate impact as well. We spoke about being inclusive for everybody in terms of race and ethnicity. So for example, in terms of race and religion, if you have a particular population that need a quiet space to pray during the day, don't target it as that's the prayer room. Make it a quiet room that can be used by everybody, so that you are valuing difference in an inclusive way. And race and mental health was a fabulous session, and really was understanding what is mental health, as we know with the wellbeing, not just in this context, but it's a key concern for many of us in terms of COVID, but really understanding that our companies are focusing and understand how to tackle microaggression and feelings of poor mental health because of someone's race within the organisation. So just very quickly, I wanted to share that. And in the report, for those of you who've read it, there is a fabulous conversation we had with Sonia Meggie, who is a diversity and inclusion consultant with the business in the community. And we asked her lots of questions. And I just wanted to highlight the top things here. But she was very much that the key thing we have to do is act. If we say, oh, it will take time, it will do this, people from an ethnic minority have been hearing that in her, as she says in the report, for too long. And, with the impact of COVID, she highlighted that, disproportionately impacting people from an ethnic minority background. A stark point there that, for even before the pandemic, that for a Black family had 10p for every £1 of wealth a white family had. So it really, the impact is in every context. And she said for Black Lives Matter, which we'll come to in a second, it's not too late. So we said that 90% of people felt their businesses hadn't done anything. And I asked her, so how can it be done authentically? And it's not too late. It's about listening, it's about focus, and it's about really having the opportunity. And I think we saw that in the chat from one of the participants about having courageous conversations, and it comes from the top. And it's about creating safe space to do that. And not to plug any of our webinars, but we did an amazing one on Monday about creating those courageous conversations. So I would really encourage you to go back on the recordings and listen to that. It was absolutely fabulous about how leaders can do that. There isn't one magic silver bullet, it's holistic. So please don't think that putting everybody through unconscious bias training is going to move the dial significantly. And really, I think the most poignant thing that Sonia said was, leaders, think about your influence and privilege and how you and what you have and the platforms that you have, both internally and externally, to be an ally, to make the voice heard and amplify. So I just wanted to share that with you because that's in the report as well, which I thought was particularly powerful. And then back to Taya's point for action and everything that we're doing. So the Inclusive Leader Programme, as we've said, that is happening. There are now toolkits that are available through our website that Ina have very kindly provided with us on the 3 topics that we covered. And these are fabulous. They take companies through every step and tools and tips and solutions. The companies that you can see there, we have worked with them to get them to sign and support the Business in the Community Race at Work Charter as well. And I think hospitality and travel and leisure are leading the way in terms of sector. I think it would be fair to say for the number of companies from one sector that have signed the charter, which is fabulous. Lots more to do that. So if your company is not there, we would want to hear from you. We have a reverse mentoring program within WiHTL, across industry reverse mentoring, where senior executives, C-suite executives are reverse mentored by ethnic minority talent in other businesses, which has been proving to be a really great resource. So again, one of the key actions. We have the Race and Ethnicity in HTL Committee, and you can see the members there. We have a few of them on the call today, which is fabulous. And we're focusing on 3 areas: data, which is not a surprise, women of colour, and the Ethnic Minority Future Leader Programme, which is very exciting and is in draft process at the moment, but I'll very quickly share that with you. So we have a data group as part of the committee, and you can see, and we partner with HR Data Hub, and you can see there the process that we are taking businesses through to help really use data. And back to Katy's point, not just to see the data, but to use it for decision making, to build aspiration and to track progress as well. Women of colour, this was shared by Ina, and it just basically shows the journey of a woman of colour through in our organisation, and how and why we lose fabulous talent potentially within the organisation. And then very exciting, this is a working title, but we are working with the work stream to create a Future Leaders programme. That will be a 6-month programme. We're looking at 2 sessions per month, 6 of which will be roundtables, C-suite, opportunities, networking opportunities, 6 developmental sessions as well, being part of the reverse mentoring, and we're hoping to launch it in January 2021. So very exciting. So that really is a whistle-stop tour of the actions that we're hoping to drive through the sector as well.
Okay, we wanted to launch a couple of polls as well, just to get a few views from you, try and engage as many of you as possible on how has your company responded to the Black Lives Matter movement. Has your company responded well, very well, in some way? It's been inadequate, or they haven't responded, or you don't know. So we are at 40%. We so far only one person has said that they have responded very well, or 2 people, it's gone up. So 54% of you have voted. So I need a few more votes before I close the poll. We are at 68%. Couple more votes, and then we'll close it Okay, we are at 70. There is always a 30% that doesn't vote. So I will end the poll and share the results. So 11%, so 3 people have said that your company has responded well. Please let us know, who you are confidentially so that we can engage with you. 21% yes in some way.
I mentioned that we asked a very similar question to the 60 CEOs and HR directors. It was exactly the same scale and almost identical actually in the distribution. So I think the findings from this group are very similar to that of the leadership. Yeah.
So 29% no and 14% don't know. I really would like to engage with each one of you to find out a little bit more so that we can understand and perhaps engage with some of your leaders and persuade them to come and sign the charter and make a commitment. Do we want to try and do the Menti?
Sure.
Shall we try and do that? So based on that feedback, what we would like to do is
I would do it. So for those of you who know Menti, I need you to get your phones out and I need you to go to menti.com. And I want, when you go on to menti.com, it will ask you for a code. And if you can all see my screen, you just need to put that code in. And when it says, how does that make you feel? That's in relation to the poll that we've just seen for the Black Lives Matter movement. So when you see those statistics and you've seen how people feel their companies have responded to the Black Lives Matter movement, as a sector, as an industry, how does that now make you feel? And you can put up to 3 words. So I encourage you to go to your phone, go to menti.com, and you'll start to see, if it works, a word cloud forming. So as all of you start to put in, you'll start to see a word cloud coming through. And once you get used to Menti, it's addictive. It's not very commonplace. But please let me know if that's working for you. As you can see, it's quite dynamic.
I think embarrassed and disappointed seem to be so far the big ones, followed by hopeful. So some sad, some not surprised, more effort needed, frustrated. I've seen united somewhere. I've seen the word opportunities. We'll have to take a picture of this, Gina. Keeps moving, but still I think the 3 big words of frustrated is getting a little bit bigger. I still like to keep the hopeful and the positive one, and the optimistic, that is where they're determined as well. Keeps moving. Thank you for participating. It has worked, which is brilliant. It's the first time we have used, so just a success from that perspective. I think that we've tried this time to engage you. I've seen lots of comments in the chat, and about media, BLM too as a suggestion, not just the BLM, but also Black Lives Matter too, like all lives matter. Some comments around insightful and research. Thank you for doing that. And more in terms of how to make people feel comfortable talking about race and racism in particular. So I will, we are at 3 o'clock on the dot. I will bring this to a conclusion. And thank you very much to Elliott and the team from MBS who have been together with Katy and the team from PwC on the journey with us, really from the word go, in terms of collecting data and in terms of sharing and analyzing and having an insight Thank you for Joanna and Gina for supporting the conversation today. Before I let you go, I know everybody just goes right on the dot, but if I can keep you for one more minute, just a couple of thoughts from me. I really would like to finish on a positive note. This is not the time to slow down. This is the time to actually, I think, accelerate on our individual and collaborative efforts to create a more inclusive environments, and this crisis can be the catalyst for meaningful change. So we'd like to finish quoting a proverb, an African proverb that I always like to refer to, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So very much we believe in the power of collaboration to make change happen, and I know that together we can make change happen. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. As we've mentioned a couple of times, we've got a few more webinars to bring to you interesting, relevant and insightful content. The next one is on Monday, the 12th of October. We will be talking about utilizing the mindsets of curiosity, courage, connection to make a tangible impact. And before you go, if you don't follow us on LinkedIn as yet, please do so. We have a handful more. We need a handful more to hit our 2,000 targets by the time we turn 2 on the 16th of October. So it would be great to get to that 2,000 number. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to seeing you to one of our future sessions. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Tara. Bye-bye.